I was talking about how the U.S. government has tampered in many elections over the course of the decades, but I'm sure they've never done anything domestically. And it was specifically the CIA, just so you guys know. In any case, let me plug you in here, Carlino. You're going to step in, and we'll give you a big round of applause here. Welcome you.
Hey.
Hold on just a second. Go ahead and say something, Carlino.
Hey, testing. Hello.
That sounds good. Let me give you 1 second. All right, go ahead.
Hello, testing. What's up?
Beautiful.
What's up?
You're on the screen.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, he can hear you guys.
Hey, cool. So, who wants voting on the blockchain? Raise your hand. Who wants JPEGs on Bitcoin? That is not what we're here to discuss. So sorry to disappoint. But it's a pleasure to talk to you guys. It's kind of weird because I can't really hear you, but I hope you enjoy the movie. It's a 15-minute thing we put together because this is what you're about to see is something that we worked on for years, and we managed to pull it off. And no one's in jail and no one's dead, which was what we were primarily trying to avoid. And the story was fucking cool. So I hope you enjoy it, and we get a chance to talk about it afterwards.
Awesome. Sounds great. I'm going to go ahead and start her up.
The Democratic Republic of Guatemala has spoken. The election process is complete, and the elected authorities stand officially announced.
Reafirmamos como inalienables los derechos de los ciudadanos expresados en las urnas.
El Tribunal Supremo Electoral acredita al ciudadano César Bernardo Arévalo de León como presidente electo de la República de Guatemala, Karin Larisa Herrera Aguilar como vicepresidente electa de la República de Guatemala,
Solo estoy haciendo mi trabajo.
Yet, even as the ink dries on the official announcement, the very pillars of democracy are being shaken. This, right here, is an unidentified agent from the public prosecutor's office, aggressively and illegally seizing a box full of election documents, known locally as document number 4. This is Magistrate Blanca Alfaro from the Supreme Elections Tribunal, trying to physically protect what's rightfully under their institution's custody. In a world riddled with displays of power abuse and corruption, this is but one stark example. Yet, hope is not lost. It so happens that we might already possess the means to fix this. Every 4 years, sacred places emerge in Guatemala. Here, in this hallowed space, democracy takes the stage, and choices carve out the future.
No es un secreto el que siempre digan de que se hace trampa y todo esto, ¿verdad? Entonces sí me motivó como que estar bien del otro lado, sabiendo que las cosas pues sí realmente se hacen de la manera correcta.
Y esta actividad la hemos realizado ya año con año en lo que es en las elecciones, y para nosotros es un placer pues servir a nuestra nación.
A mí lo que me está motivando a apoyar en esas elecciones es poder aportar un poco a Guatemala, ¿verdad? Poder ver cómo es el proceso y que este sea transparente.
Yo quiero que verdaderamente Guatemala mejore.
Porque muchas personas solo criticamos y decimos, no, el gobierno no hace nada, pero nosotros somos los que elegimos.
At the heart of democracy, a table stands, simple yet powerful. But before it takes its revered position on Election Day, a ritual of meticulous organization unfolds. 3 pillars come together in this ceremonial preparation: the Supreme Elections Tribunal, a referee; political organizations, the competing voices; and civilian volunteers, the custodians for a peaceful transition of power. Temporary civic structures emerge. District election boards and municipal elections boards. They are entrusted with the responsibility to safeguard and summarize what each table will birth, the voting results enshrined in their document number 4. Hundreds of thousands of individuals are mobilized, colloquially referred to as the Citizen Army. The stage is set, and as the day unfolds, each table transforms into a pivotal node, capturing the nation's choice with reverence and purpose. Come Election Day, the table stands prepared, revered spaces where volunteer citizens, designated and sworn in by law as the Vote Reception Board, are poised to embrace their neighbors' ballots. As the day concludes, document number 4 emanates from each table, accompanied by its 2 triplicates, a tangible testament to democracy, meticulously crafted under vigilant eyes. These hundreds of thousands of papers collectively capture the final count and consensus of the people, forming the very soul of Guatemalan democracy.
Encontrarnos en el Centro de Operaciones del Proceso Electoral. Tenemos un gran equipo de trabajo que ya está preparando un kit que contiene algunos materiales e insumos electorales que se van a colocar dentro de la caja que se va a enviar a cada junta receptora de votos. Tenemos que preparar 24.585 cajas de estas que no solamente llevan estos insumos, sino que también va a contener las papeletas electorales, el padrón electoral y todas las actas que suscriben las mesas receptoras de votos, hasta la del escrutinio, ¿verdad? Donde constan los resultados finales en la mesa.
En esta caja vienen todos los insumos, viene el acta inicial, así como el acta de cierre, que es este número 4, con todas las cosas que necesitamos. Acá está el acta ahorita y la sacamos ya a las 6 de la tarde cuando empezamos a hacer todo el conteo de votos.
Volunteers, ordinary citizens gather, performing the ritual of counting, validating, ensuring that every voice is heard.
317 votantes.
317 y acá vamos a llenar esto.
Exacto. In the tangible realm, paper stands as a testament to the collective will. Solid, real, palpable.
Ahí se condensa el resultado final por mesa. Eso es lo que hace el documento 4. Eso es lo que no entiende mucha gente, muchos políticos y aún la gente normal. Nosotros que estamos metidos acá, pues lo sabemos. La elección la hace el ciudadano. Desde el momento en que el tribunal le entrega, o sea, nombra a las juntas departamentales y a las juntas municipales. Entonces ellos se convierten en las autoridades electorales y ellos nombran a las juntas receptoras de votos, que son ciudadanos comunes y corrientes. Entonces, si yo como ciudadano común y corriente estoy participando en una mesa y gana determinado candidato, no pueden decir que no, porque los 5 o los 4 que están conmigo Y los fiscales que estuvieron en esa mesa, todos ven el resultado.
Though born twins, the white and yellow copies embark on distinct journeys.
Ellos se quedan con este documento en original. Este documento en original se lo trasladan a la Junta Electoral Municipal, que son ciudadanos también. Ellos son los encargados de hacer el total por cada municipio. A su vez, esos totales se los trasladan a una Junta Electoral Departamental, quienes son los encargados de totalizar todos los resultados a nivel departamental y a nivel nacional. Cuando ellos finalizan de hacer la totalización de todos los resultados oficiales, lo entregan al Tribunal Supremo Electoral y esos son los resultados oficiales.
The yellow, gobbled by the scanner, sets forth on its digital voyage. Outside of our physical realm, the scanned image and the typed data merge in the digital domain.
Es importante aclarar que el día de las elecciones la copia amarilla sirve para dar una tendencia, pero no son los resultados oficiales.
Hay que recordar que el TREP es para la ciudadanía, es para los guatemaltecos que votaron y que están interesados en ver cómo va la elección. Ese es el objetivo del TREP.
De ahí proviene el nombre del programa informático de transmisión de resultados electorales y la palabra clave es preliminares.
La mesa de votación tiene gente que suma los votos, que llena las actas, cuenta los votos y llena las actas a mano, ¿sale? Cuando terminan de llenar esas actas, se van con el digitador de ese centro de votación, que es ella. En ese momento ella dice, ya me cayeron todas las actas de esa mesa. Las mete todas, las 5 las mete, o una si le dieron lo que le hayan dado, las mete al escáner.
Este es el sistema que estamos utilizando y acá tenemos la opción de digitalizar. Entonces acá las ponemos en el escáner que cada uno tiene, es personal. Ahí te está procesando la imagen.
Cuando cuadra, entonces envíen. Aquí. Y de ahí me voy a verificación para ver las de mis compañeros también. Es otro proceso.
Todas las va a capturar ella, todas, la primera vez. Después de que la capture y le dan el botón verde para enviar, le va a caer a otra persona del municipio, pero no en ese centro de votación. Y se hace la segunda captura. Si coincide, se publica en ese instante en internet.
But this fusion can sometimes obscure clarity, casting lingering shadows of doubt and uncertainty.
Leen la pantalla. En el camino pasa por la computadora y ahí hay programas que alteran los resultados.
Tengo información fidedigna que hay 5 hackers. En tan solo 14 segundos cambiaron los datos y las cifras. No se respetó el voto de los guatemaltecos.
When crossing the threshold into the vast and mysterious digital universe, things can get a bit unpredictable. Yet imagine a filter, a groundbreaking solution that could distill pure signal from digital noise.
The reason why Bitcoin is useful for an election is similar to the reason why Bitcoin is useful for money. We're using it for one purpose here, using it for a different purpose when we send money around. But the important thing is that because all of these communities have one common goal, which is the truth, we can all use the same system that is good at helping people come to the truth.
Hoy por hoy podemos resolver el problema que tiene el modelo original, que ha caído en irse centralizando de nuevo. Lo podemos volver a descentralizar con tecnología, pero solo hay una tecnología que lo puede lograr y es el blockchain.
El programa informático está habilitado para poder iniciar las actividades desde los centros de votación. Se ha generado un documento para poder registrarlo en el servicio de copia inalterable, el cual fue adquirido para esta finalidad.
What a timestamp really does is it proves data exists in the past. And someone went and decided to go use open timestamps to go timestamp documents on this election, and they called me in just to go be a second set of eyes and make sure it all works. You know, I was just sitting here making sure everything works, and so far so good.
En cuanto se escanea un acta y se digitaliza, se le saca el hash, nosotros le decimos la huella digital, entonces ese hash se manda a guardar usando un protocolo que se llama Open Timestamps. Ese protocolo sirve para mandar a guardar los hashes hacia el blockchain de Bitcoin.
Esta plataforma, digamos, es un puente que comunica el TREP y donde hace un respaldo no solo de la imagen, sino que tiene una API que gestiona y hace un cálculo, digamos, del hash, de la huella digital del documento, y lo manda a guardar a la cadena de bloqueo.
For technical reasons, Bitcoin is by far the easiest and simplest ways to do this. You know, that's a Bitcoin transaction that's waiting to get mined, and these are all the transactions that have been mined before. The election documents way at the bottom of this tree of trees, and eventually proved through a whole bunch of mathematical operations that all this led to a Bitcoin block.
El tema del papel de las elecciones es considerado un patrimonio nacional. Claro, eso no está, digamos, regulado en una ley, pero la ciudadanía sí lo ve. ¿Por qué? Porque es la misma ciudadanía que llena estos documentos.
The only acceptable election solution is something where anyone can verify. Anyone can be part of that process.
Y entonces creo que eso es algo que podemos mantener, pero implementando nuevas tecnologías lo podemos hacer más ágil y eficiente.
And the beauty of paper is, you know, to make it integrity, you just need a whole lot of eyes from a whole bunch of observers.
Entonces en el TREP, aquí podemos ver, digamos, cuántas actas han sido procesadas adentro del TREP, la participación ciudadana y todo eso, ¿verdad? Este es el acta, literalmente el acta que está en el TREP, pero yo quiero verificar. Entonces aquí está el botón de verificar hash. Al dar clic en el botón de verificar hash, lo lleva a la página de Simple Proof, el respaldo inalterable, donde podemos ver el momento que Simple Proof recibió el documento, el hash o huella, ¿verdad? El estado ya está registrado en blockchain, el bloque en el que se registró, el bloque de blockchain, fecha y hora de confirmación adentro del blockchain, y yo puedo descargar también los documentos. Entonces este es el acta que yo bajé del respaldo inalterable, ¿verdad? Esta es la que se usó para registrar en el blockchain, pero yo puedo venir y comparar con la que está en el sistema y resulta que es la misma, ¿verdad? Pues en este caso coinciden, ¿verdad? Y eso es lo que estamos tratando de darle esa como certeza.
Tenemos que ir encontrando cómo utilizarla para poder devolverle el poder a las juntas departamentales, a las juntas municipales.
Le veo, digamos, futuro a la implementación del blockchain. Podemos utilizarlo para diferentes tipos de transacciones o para respaldo, digamos, de documentos públicos, ¿verdad?
Entonces ese modelo es el que hay que salvar. Ese es el modelo que hay que salvar.
For Guatemalans, the narrative is still unfolding. With inalterable evidence in hand, there's hope that their democracy will stand resilient against institutional corruption. Meanwhile, a pressing question dawns. Who will be the next country to embrace the path towards an immutable democracy?
The crowd goes wild. The crowd goes wild. You're back on the screen here, Paulinho. The crowd goes wild. I want to know, so tell us about the sequel. I want to know, I mean, what happened? So tell us about the sequel. I want to know, I mean, what happened?
It's an ongoing saga. It's an ongoing saga. It's barely starting to make its way through the court system. It's barely starting to make its way through the court.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So we needed to produce the documentary as quickly as possible because we wanted to get the word out to try to get potentially into other countries. El Salvador had their elections in February. And so, but then also we the legal process takes a while, like anything legal, and so the court is in session. The Election Crimes Unit has submitted their arguments for election fraud and are accusing the election authorities of tampering documents. So Bitcoin proves that that didn't happen, at least in the part where we were allowed to work with. And so eventually, it's at a kangaroo court level, and it'll take years to eventually get appealed. And I hope to eventually be at the Guatemalan Supreme Court, explaining, how the Bitcoin blockchain works and teaching them a little, cryptography. And it might be the first time ever that open timestamps and Bitcoin are used in a court setting, particularly for a national election.
That's incredible. Pretty crazy. So can you, for me, so you're basically hashing the image, and then if they produce another image, the ballot that's, doesn't match the hash, then it's like, okay, this was tampered. Is that basically?
I can share my screen and actually just walk you through it. Would my screen pop up or?
Please do. Yeah.
Let's see. So, check out Open Timestamps. It's opentimestamps.org. Let's start with, where was the other thing? Yeah. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So that is obviously proper custodying of evidence, right? If that doesn't inspire confidence in you, I don't know what will. So basically, this proves that despite having a paper trail, because these dumbasses went in and just ripped everything out, you can't trust the paper trail anymore, right? Because, look at these folks, right? It's like, simple proof, we exist to uphold information integrity. And so this is our first client, trep.gt. Let me throw this into the chat. So you literally can do all of this yourselves. Don't trust, verify. Don't believe me. Prove it for yourselves. This stands for Preliminary Results Transmission. And so you can see election 2023. There's two bubbles here. The first one is the June general election, and the second is the August runoff. I'm going to go to the June general because that's the contentious one. Oh.
We're back. Yeah, they're saying they shut you down. You froze there for a second, but you're back, I think.
Okay. So you can see it's toggled on Presidente, but I could select these other menus to go into the other elections. I'm not going to because no one gives a shit about Congress. And so on the presidential, they're saying, all right, so we have 99% of all the documents here, 121,000 out of 122,000. And the last update was to this database was June 29th, 2023, right? But how do I verify that claim, right? And so this website is what the media uses to publish the results. So you can see, there's our little map, up here to the northwest is Mexico, down to the southeast is El Salvador. And I could select the different voting districts to check out each results. But if I keep going down, it shows me the national totals, right? So Green Party won, blue came in pretty badly, yellow, etc., right? But again, these are all pretty large numbers, 654,000 Semilla. This is the candidate that actually ended up winning, right? So it's like, how do I verify these 654,000 votes, right? Don't trust, verify. If I go back up here, there's a section that says results by Mesa Electoral or voting table. What is your favorite number between 1 and 24,500?
21.
Obviously. Fan favorite for sure. So instead of why 24,500 is there are about 24,500 voting tables in the 2023 election. Each table has a maximum of 500 citizens signed to it. So that's how we break down all 9.2 million voters into 24,500 of these tables. And so now that I selected table number 21, I basically honed into that specific building block, right? Like the lowest level on this hierarchy. And so now instead of looking at hundreds of thousands, it's showing me, much smaller numbers. Basically, how were those 500 votes distributed out between all these clowns competing for the clown show, right? And so again, cool database, bro. Fancy bar graphs, like real 1990s. How do I verify? Once you go into the table, you can actually keep going down, and there's this blue button that says Ver. And so now I've pulled up document number 4, yellow version of table number 21, where we can see that Julio, Javier, and Maria were the citizens working this table. They are the custodians of the ballots. I like to think of them as CoinJoin coordinators, because right below them, you see that they're saying 272 people out of the 500 bothered to show up to vote, right? Those 272 votes were counted one by one and distributed in this way. Ooh. Am I still on? Am I good?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what the document number 4 is, it's effectively a coin join. That's why, I'll pause here to say democracy is useful to orange pill people about proof of work consensus algorithms, because this is effectively a proof of work consensus algorithm done on paper, right? You can do cryptography using a pen and paper. And specifically, the document number 4 is a coin join because it's a public document, so we can actually trace the transaction and check all the inputs, the 272 inputs. But because all 272 votes were joined together, it doesn't sacrifice people's privacy. So I like to think that democracy is our way that we can fight back all these, people saying that coin joins are bad and privacy is bad. It's like, if it's so bad, then why is it used basically in all voting processes all over the world to protect the individual's right to privacy and keep the ballots a secret, right? So one little point there for Bitcoin. And so the question is, how do I trust this document, right? Like, in the backstory here is in 2019, I was plugged into this system trying to audit it, and it collapsed and I couldn't trust the data. I'm convinced they stole the election. And so we built all this in 2023 to keep that from happening. And so what the authorities did was add this orange button that says verificar hash. And so obviously I could just right click this and save the JPEG on my desktop, right? And so if it's on my desktop, I could then very quickly calculate the SHA-256 of the JPEG that the authorities are publishing. And then if I click verify hash, it'll take me now to Simple Proof's immutable backup. And I can toggle between Spanish and English. Ooh, fancy. And so what the immutable backup does is Simple Proofs just says, this JPEG appeared on our database at 10 p.m. on June 25th, right? And it has this SHA-256, and you can find proof of that SHA on block number 795,961, which has a timestamp of June 25th, 2023 at 10:18 p.m., which means that Simple Proof had this document for a total of 8 minutes before it was publicly viewable and verifiable by anyone running a full Bitcoin node, right? 8 minutes is still a long time, so maybe Simple Proof changed the document, so it's not perfect. But in 2019, the authorities took 6 days to give me these documents. And last I checked, 6 days is a hell of a lot longer than 8 minutes. And that's basically what we did, right? We diminished the amount of fuckery from 6 days to about the time that it takes to hash a block, right? And so further down is the proof, right? So here's the source file. So I could click on view and bring up the JPEG and visually compare it to the one I was showing you earlier, right? Or a much more smart approach would be to just download it to my desktop and calculate the SHA-256 and compare it to the other one, right? And so if they match, we know for a fact that the JPEG on the Simple Proof website is the same as the JPEG on the Elections Authority website. But that's all that we've done at that point, right? Confirm that the data is the same. That means that technically, if fuckery took place, you'd have to get two contractors to collude with one another. Not a high bar, but at least it's a bar, right? But that's when open timestamps comes in. And so I'll reemphasize, if you don't know what open timestamps is, go and look at it. It's opentimestamps.org. It's been, it's all the code is here. It's public source, available since 2016. You can literally just go in there and drag any file here and get it timestamped to Bitcoin for free using Peter Todd's public calendars. And so if you ever need something timestamped because it might be used against you in court, like, I suggest using this, right? It's very powerful and basically free. So let me actually show you what an open timestamps file looks like. If you click on the view button, it now shows you the same hash, but then below it, all of the cryptographic proofs that demonstrate that this was indeed timestamped to Bitcoin. So that's where in the scene where Peter Todd is saying that through a series of a tree of trees, this all gets confirmed up to Bitcoin. So that's what you're looking at here, and you can just download that and check it yourself. What we built to improve upon this is this button that says View Merkle Tree. When you click that, you go to the Open Timestamps Navigator, which is a tool that we built to basically make it graphical so that even a government bureaucrat or a journalist can understand basic Bitcoin cryptography. And so at the bottom of this tree, we've highlighted in orange the SHA, so 7834EC, right? You can see that there. If I go back to the SHA-256, it's 7834EC. So we should be looking at the same SHA-256. And so all you do now is follow the orange brick road up, and you can see that there's these proofs, right? It's basically one SHA concatenated to another one, and then a new SHA is produced as a result, creating a mother hash, and then that process happens again and again and again and again. And that's how we tie all of these SHA-256s together into this Merkle tree, that if you follow the orange brick road all the way up to the origin, it takes you to the Merkle root. This one also has its own hash, which we can copy here. But the difference between the root and the rest of the leaves on the tree is that there's a transaction ID as well. So you could pop that into your Bitcoin node and verify this for yourself. We provide a link to mempool.space, right? To make it, now we're on the Wiz database. We're no longer on the Simple Proof database. And we can see that here's the transaction, here's the timestamp, and I could click on more details if I wanted to see even more. So we can see here's the block. The timestamp is June 25th, 2023 at 10:18, which again matches this timestamp that we had. But then further down, it's got op return. And if we keep going down into the details section, and I pop into the details section, the SHA-256 from the Merkle root, I find that the op return function includes that Merkle root function. That Merkle root SHA-256. So through one single SHA-256, we've been able to tie down all of these, whatever amount of data. Like you could literally do infinity -1 into a Merkle tree and then timestamp it to Bitcoin. But what that does, it means that not only can we prove that this JPEG is the same as the JPEG on our database, but we also can prove that it exists as of election night. And that's extremely powerful.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. That's crazy. So, I don't know, do you guys have any questions? Like, I'm gonna have him take the mic so he can hear you.
Go for it. So it's not perfect, right? But sure, shit's better than the stuff they had before, where it took them 6 days. And so, yeah.
Carlino, can you hear the mic?
I can.
Okay, awesome.
My question is then, does Guatemala do same day in-person voter ID required voting?
Yes. So I said each voting table has a maximum of 500 citizens assigned to it. When you show up at your table, you have to show your ID. And so then the citizens, the CoinJoin coordinators, the citizens that are casting the ballots, they have access to the voting roll. So it's a list of everyone that's assigned to that table. It's a small picture of the citizen plus all the information on the ID. So when you show up, the first thing I do is, can I see your ID? You show me your ID. I check you're on the roll. If you are, great. But before I give you the ballots, we do this even crazier, technology, which is basically you have to show your hands. And so even if you're on the voting roll, if when you show your hands, you've got any kind of shit on your hands, they won't give you the paper ballots. Because if you don't have anything on your hands, you're given your ballots, and then we take indelible ink and we rub one of your fingerprints on the indelible ink, which means that for the next 3 days, you're going to have shit on your hands. Well, something that looks like shit on your hands, but it's just indelible ink. And so that's our way of protecting against the double spend problem, right? Even if you manage to get yourself on multiple voting rolls, all you've done is change your registered address and move one vote. But as long as people do the indelible ink portion, right, where they actually, I think you're muted. I don't know if.
Back. Sorry, you just cut out for just a moment. Last we saw was you like this.
But you heard the indelible ink bit, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's wild.
Cheap solutions for developing world, right? Like, no need to make it fancy and complicated and expensive.
Simplicity is key.
Yeah, thank you. That demo was pretty sweet. Definitely different to what we have here. I'm curious to hear some of your experiences and what has been going on around the country from what I would call the election verifiers and the people who are on board with this versus the election trusters who are like, no, this the opposition that you're referring to. Can you kind of describe what's going on the ground and whether the media narrative and how that's been playing out?
In Guatemala?
Yeah, after this election, with all of the kind of follow-up to the data that you've been collecting and the opposition and kind of how it's been going through the courts. You said you expect it to end up in the Supreme Court. So, what have been, I guess, for the election trusters, their argument, or is it just trust us and shut up?
So if we had more time, I'd show you the layer 2 aspect of this, which is once I got all the primary source data to not change, what I then did is I partnered with Stackwork to audit the whole thing. And so I actually looked over all 150,000 JPEGs and created my own independent database to compare it against their database. And I published a 272-page report, that's right here, that goes into exactly what we found. So, here it is. If I can share my screen once more, let me bring it up on mine. One second. Oh, yes. I also, so 1 second. So yeah, don't trust verify. First, you get the primary source data to not change, and then we unleashed Lightning Network on it. And so basically, I turned election auditing into a game. And so here's my little top scorers of the arcade. The top scorer earned 383,000 sats by auditing the election, and number 10, 112,000. So that's the other point of understanding that democracy is an opportunity to reach normies. And so basically all these people helped me work on this through Stackwork, and I can show you how that is. And here's the report. I literally go into all of it. And so there were, and I did 2019 and 2015 so that I could actually start to create patterns of where the funny stuff is happening and if it's repeating and what the patterns are. And so that's what I did, right? There's a bunch of people out there that are the trust me, bro, like the authorities wouldn't lie and all that stuff. But for the folks that actually were like distrusting, that's where I tried to create that space for them to say, if you don't trust the election, like arguing about it or protesting on the street seems kind of stupid. If we have access to the data, we can just check it and then compare it to make sure that it makes sense. And so we did that for about over 1,000 elections. And because we had the presidential election, we had the National Congress, we had District Congress, we had small towns. Like it literally every time we have an election, it's 360 some odd elections. And so what I found is that the presidential election was fortunately legit. There was over 220,000 votes cast in favor of the winner, above the next one in line. So they would have had to collude with over 50,000 people. It's just mathematically very, very unlikely that there was fraud in the presidential election. However, in small towns where the difference between the winner and the loser was like 100 votes, that's where I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And so the point there is, it's important. I think democracies, Bitcoiners a lot of Bitcoiners seem to be in favor of monarchies and dictatorships and kind of like strongmans or whatever. I find it very amusing, being next door to a very powerful president. And so I'm like, it's still unclear to me whether democracies will adopt Bitcoin faster than dictatorships. And I'm not in this for democracy. I'm in it for Bitcoin. I live in a democracy. I want Guatemala to adopt Bitcoin faster than El Salvador, and we got to compete, right? And so it's like, how do I hack democracy into creating an orange pill experience for people that leads them to Bitcoin? In the process, you produce documentation that actually gives people evidence that is also replicable, right? Like all that we've done, anyone can do. It's just a ton of work, and so no one wants to do it. Now, there are still a lot of people that are convinced that the elections were stolen, because it doesn't matter, how much work you do. There are some folks that are convinced that, the reptilians or whoever, controls the cabal. Like, I don't know what to tell those people. Every time they tell me, I just plead with them, like, show me the evidence. Like, show me one document where you've seen like 100 votes getting pushed one way or another. Like, I'm all for it, man. Like, give me the goods and let's go. But no one's taking me up on that yet. So long-winded answer, but just want to emphasize that I think that's how we win. That's why democracies can adopt Bitcoin faster, because we have to go through this bullshit every 4 years or so, killing each other over, who wins this popularity contest. Let's use all that energy to push people faster into Bitcoin.
Hey, Cardi, Leo, this is Jim. What's up, man? Can you put this into historical context? If I'm not mistaken, the term Banana Republic comes from Guatemala, and that's because, like, didn't the CIA pull a lot of fuckery, messing with your elections, but now it seems like you have a pretty robust, correction regime. If you put that in a historical context and maybe even compare that to the U.S., where it's like, voter ID is racist, and you're a terrible person if you question elections.
Sure. So the quick and dirty is the ruling regime of Guatemala, which lost in 2023 and immediately argued election fraud, weaponized the justice system, controls the current, equivalent of the FBI. Like, that regime has been in power in Guatemala since the late 50s. And so the way I describe it is, we've had democracy since the 80s, and before then we had a vote system. And basically what the regime created was a system where they would change the management, but the owners were still the same. So new boss, same as the old boss, right? So that's what happened for 80 years. And the reason there was such a ruckus was that this is the first time since the early 50s that we have new management that responds to a different owner. And I'll emphasize, we all work for somebody, right? So they were very upset about that. Now, the historical context is that regime that's been in power took power from the current guy, basically with the help of the CIA, right? So famously, the CIA's first coup was Iran in the early 50s. And that went so well that they immediately wanted to, replicate and franchise the thing. And the second place that they went into was Guatemala. And so the CIA-sponsored coup was, a local cabal of people that got help from, Uncle Sam. And, Uncle Sam's a really solid dude. When he's got your back, you can do all sorts of wacky shit. And so they got in power. And from the late 50s through the 80s, we had elections, and a series of military juntas ran the country, and the winner was always the military junta's official candidate. Why? Because when you showed up to vote, there'd be a soldier or a cop with a gun, asking you, who do you want to vote for? And then the ballots would just disappear, and all of a sudden, hey, the military junta won again, and that happened. Throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s. All of the military juntas, as far as I know, were trained at the School of the Americas, a very well-known outfit run by the State Department, I think, or just basically U.S. military training foreign Latin American dictators. And, so they were running that playbook up until the early 80s when everyone knew that they were finally going to lose, right? They had this one candidate in the early 80s who was everyone's favorite. He was going to destroy them. And so they realized that they couldn't even pull off, a Venezuela with the election results. And so they literally sent choppers and SUVs through the city, chased him down and murdered him in cold blood, in this wacky, crazy scenario. And as a result of that, we had a revolution in the early 80s. And we took the military juntas down, and basically the young cadets, the new generation of cadets in the army, took over the country against the older military, and then gave it back to the people. And so the first thing that they did was, let's organize the voting system, and that's where we trace back this voting system that you saw, right? It's basically the last battle that we fought for as a citizenry, and that we won, right? Now, the regime was super smart in terms of over the last 40 years, we've had democracy, but they managed to basically only provide you with shitty options. And in 2023, they canceled 7 different candidates. So, you're concerned in the States, for example, Colorado tried to get Trump off the ticket. Well, our douchebag election authorities did that to 7 people. And they just figured this guy's not going to win because he's not in the polls and whatever. And that's the only reason that he won. They literally thought he was such a loser that he wasn't going to be able to win. And they just canceled everyone else. And, anyway, does that answer your question, or, way too much information, I'm sure.
No, that answers my question. Great story. I learned a lot. 3 quick comments. Number 1, people should check out Century of Self by Adam Curtis, which goes into a lot of this history of how Edward Bernays helped the CIA overthrow, American public opinion behind overthrowing your government, and then in the 50s. And then also there's a guy here, Taylor, that has a manuscript of a Spanish book about all the bullshit that the old banana company pulled. I don't know if something happened to the bike here, but I guess the banana lobbies were the real reason why the CIA had put behind this, right?
Oh yeah, well, John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles were big, stockholders in the United Fruit Company, and they had a lot of influence and basically convinced, I think it was Eisenhower, saying oh, they're all communists, and but there was a lot of people locally. I push back on the idea that it was like basically the CIA and Uncle Sam came in. It's like, yes, of course that happened, and the United Fruit Company was more than happy to topple the government in order to protect its economic interests. But there was a very strong local Guatemalan force that led the charge, and so every time you always it takes two to tango, right? Like there are local bottom feeders that would very quickly align themselves with Uncle Sam, and that's what's happened over the last 80 years. Now, curiously, you think that from watching the movie that the reason that the president was elected and the election fraud argument didn't take hold was because Bitcoin, right? That's not exactly true, right? Like, legally speaking, it is Bitcoin that proves that the election fraud accusations are complete bogus. But the real politics side of it is the United States has shifted its support from the ruling regime that it supported for 80 years and threw its weight behind the guy that won for a very, it's a long story as to why they've switched their position. But when the shit was hitting the fan and there were, protests and the country was about to go back into civil war, so that was the key. Like, the election fraud accusation people and the regime almost toppled the voting system, almost forced us to repeat the election. Had they gotten away with it, there were massive protests and we would have gone back to civil war, right? And so the U.S. was like, let's not have that, and threw its weight behind the guy that won. And the rumor is, and there's even a congressional inquiry into the State Department's role in the U.S., sponsored, I think, by Warren Davidson, which I think is a Bitcoiner. But anyway, he's asking, like, what the fuck did the State Department have to do with the Guatemalan elections? And the rumor is, basically, the State Department got on the phone with all of the judges in the justice system and told them, if you like using your U.S. bank accounts and visiting your family and your apartments in Miami, basically, you got to support this guy. But if you legally side, and the court provides like the excuse that, yeah, we need to repeat the elections. If the judges had gone in that position, then they would have lost their dollar privileges, right? So the weaponization of the US dollar is a tool in the arsenal of influencing democratic elections. We just, fortunately, in Guatemala this time around, finally, like, it sort of maybe, depends on who you ask, is beneficial to us.
Yeah, and so they took all the documents, and they still have them. Are they still investigating fraud or something?
So yeah, they took all the documents in October, and so all the paper trail is fucked. And so the only evidence that you can actually rely on is what's on Bitcoin, which is this yellow scanned version, right? So I'm super upset because I spent months telling the election authorities, why the fuck did you only scan the yellow one, right? Like, you have the scanners, you have the original one, like, why not just scan all of them? Just crazy idea, scan all of them and put it all onto Bitcoin, people. And they didn't do it. And I have all the paperwork to prove that they completely ignored me. I sued them. I went to the Supreme Court, and finally people were like, back down, like, leave it, like, you're causing a mess or whatever, like, you're not a part of the narrative. And so anyway, it's complicated, but they disappeared all the documents and finally took them over in October, which I was like, this was, you knew this was going to happen. Like, I told you. That's why the lady that falls down on the floor, like, the movie is set up to make her the heroine, but I'm pretty sure she's in cahoots with the baddies, right? But haven't been able to prove it. Regardless, she's so 2 months later, they come out with their smoking gun evidence. And let me share my screen once more. So finally, they keep us in suspense, and in December, so a full 2 months after they invade the show, they come out with this argument. And so this is the Election Crimes Unit smoking gun of election fraud. And so what you're seeing is, on the x-axis is 0 through 48 hours. So June 25th at 0 hours, all the way through June 27th at 0 hours. On the y-axis is the number of documents that were created throughout that time. And so in gray is the Election Crimes Unit argument saying, I shit you not said this, we right-clicked on all of the JPEGs and opened up the properties, and in the metadata field, they didn't know we were going to be so smart. And so we came up with timestamps. And so we found smoking gun evidence that 700 documents have a timestamp that's prior to 18 hours on voting day. And so when they finally came out with this, I was like, actually, that's pretty good, but something doesn't add up. So 3% of all the files have a timestamp prior to polls closing. And that is concerning, right? Like, if the polls haven't closed, how do you have a document with election totals? Like, that doesn't make sense. And so we were like, okay, if they're pulling out the timestamps, well, let me show you some timestamps. And so, kabow, in orange, this is what I call the non-smoking gun, which is all the timestamps on Bitcoin. And so, as you can see, instead of having 3 bumps, it kind of smooths over into a nice, beautiful bell curve, right? And this is 48 hours, so this is a lot of data, right? So this normal distribution for 125,000 files this way is pretty good. And so, again, it doesn't explain what happened in the past, so that's still concerning. However, it does mean that 53% of the files exist in the future, meaning that whoever attacked the Guatemalan election is a Rick and Morty type character who chose to use their newfound powers not to go back to January 29 or 2009 to buy a bunch of Bitcoin for cheap. No. What time travelers decided to do was to intervene the space-time continuum in order to hack the Guatemalan elections of 2023. So that's basically the argument that now Bitcoin forces the Election Crimes Unit to make. Show me proof of time traveler. Otherwise, the more plausible explanation is that 53% of the machines that created the JPEGs had a misconfiguration in the time zone and thought that they were in Baghdad in Iraq, and that's why they were in the future. And then 3% of the machines were configured to American Samoa out in the Pacific Islands. But when you consider this and you just eliminate the time zone error, it all locks perfectly and matches what's on Bitcoin. So had we not had Bitcoin, then the Election Crimes Unit argument would have, this would be all the timestamps that we have. And so Guatemala's democracy may have been destroyed because someone fucked up the clocks and created at least the impression of election fraud. And of course, the question is, did they fuck up the clocks on purpose in order to create this impression, or was it an honest mistake? I don't know. It's not that's someone else's problem. All that we were able to do is thanks to Bitcoin, thank God for Bitcoin, there was this non-smoking gun that you can actually prove in court. And this is what eventually I need to explain to the magistrates of the Guatemalan Supreme Court.
That's wild. So where are they now? So they put this forth and you go, actually, no.
Well, so I'm not an interested party in the court proceedings yet because it's at a kangaroo court. The judge is obviously, he's like the worst judge in the entire system. He's like the pawn of the regime. And so we have to wait until he finds them guilty of election fraud. And then the election authorities should appeal. But it's been a constant, I still to this day don't know if they're going to appeal. And it's a long, complicated story as to why we're kind of in there. The important thing is a court of public opinion, right? It's like all of the election truthers are like, trust me, bro. And like, no, don't trust me. Learn Bitcoin, right? So it's like, and the funny thing is, it's a progressive government that won. So a bunch of progressives and lefties that would have hated Bitcoin otherwise are now like defending Bitcoin because it's like, Bitcoin protected the elections. It's like, yeah. Don't you forget it, right? So that when you get a call from Washington saying to make Bitcoin illegal, all those progressives have to reconcile in their brain that they've been, saying that the election is truthful because blockchain, right? And of course, which blockchain? It's like it's the Bitcoin blockchain. But it takes a while for them to really mull all that over, and so it's just a constant thing where, fortunately, at least the bigwigs, right, the president and his people, I've made sure that they understand that it's Bitcoin, right, and they understand that without Bitcoin they were kind of fucked, right? So it just makes it easier for me to go in and orange pill high-ranking government people about the importance of Bitcoin.
Question. What was the total cost to implement and actually run the election?
Well, the election is it's great. It's so the yearly budget of the Guatemalan Election Authority is, I think, constitutionally or just legally 0.5% of the yearly budget. I don't know what they do on off years because we only have one election every 4 years, but they still need 0.5% on a yearly basis to do fuck all. But regardless, it's allowed to do. Sorry?
Time travel research.
I'm sure. And so the current budget of Guatemala is 20 billion per year. So what? That's like 1 billion. I mean, it's a lot of money. It's fucking 100 million per year. Now, how much they spent on the actual electronic system that I just showed you? The contractor that they hired to do all that stuff that I showed you had a $25 million contract for that website that I showed you. The contract that Simple Proof got was $1 per document, and there were roughly 300,000 documents. So it was a $300,000 contract to do all this to Bitcoin, and we basically pitched it as it's an insurance policy. So it's around 1% of what you're investing in your current digital solution. You should invest 1% as an insurance policy in case the shit hits the fan. And so far, we have a 100% use of the insurance. So I don't know about you guys, but I'd love me some insurance that you can use 100% of the time. So cheap. I shit you not, when we pitched it to them, they were like, I can't believe it's this cheap. And we're like, well, it's Bitcoin, right?
And now how much did you pay the Stackwork?
Yeah, that was completely independent. It's a long story. There's a lot of data that is still kind of hard to parse. So the numbers the best that I can in terms of numbers is 66 million Satoshis were distributed out to over 1,500 people. The majority of that was the high performers. But yeah, and Bitcoin was about 30,000 at the time. So I'd say a good $20,000 worth of Bitcoin over Lightning was distributed out to around 1,500 people that most of them had never experienced a Lightning transaction. So
that's awesome. And was it just Guatemalans that were doing how did you?
Sure. At first, I had it open. It was just a phone number that you had to plug in, and I had it originally open to anyone in the Americas. But I quickly changed that because it's very, very expensive to send text messages out of Guatemala. I mean, it was a problem. But then Stackwork used also their community, which is mainly in the Philippines and El Salvador. And that was another about 60 million sats. So in total, it was like 130. So 1.2, 1.3 Bitcoin was the total amount paid out through Stackwork. But about half of that went outside of Guatemala, and half of it stayed in Guatemala. And so, yeah, that's the thing. In terms of our data, it means that about half of it was produced by Guatemalans, half of it by random people online just making money through Stackwork.
That's really cool. So what's next? 2027?
Well, yes. So 2027, my vow to Guatemala is I will do everything I can to make the Guatemalan voting system the most trustworthy voting system on the planet. because it's verifiable and anyone can basically just run a full node. The message is let's use democracy and let's run full nodes on democracy. So it's important to run full nodes in Bitcoin. Also, running full nodes in democracy, you have to do the audit, right? And so you think of every 4 years, every election cycle as a block. And so all the votes inside the block are the transactions. If you run a full node, it gives you this opportunity to pay people in sats. And because it's every 4 years, more or less, you lock people's, Moscow time, right? Like you lock people's Satoshi per dollar to that election. And so 4 years from now, I just put up a bunch of billboards out in Guatemala reminding people how many sats they earned last time, right? And so that'll get a lot of people to show up and do the work because they'll expect that many sats. They'll get paid less, right? But then that's the lesson, right? It's like, well, just hodl. So that's in terms of the Guatemalan aspect of it. And then currently, the reason we're doing this is simple proof, not the auditing bit through Stackwork, but just the protecting the documents can be done very quickly, right? And so we are very hopeful that we can do this in the US come November. And so anyone that is interested in talking to their local county clerk or might know someone in politics that has the ability to implement something at a local level, well, say every state has its own election law, but the election authorities who are responsible to implement that are at the local county level. And so if we can get to someone there, right, which might be your neighbor, your cousin, your uncle, something like that, if we can get someone like that to believe in this and protect the data that they produce on election night, then this November, we can actually make the case that Bitcoin now protects democracy in the United States. Therefore, if you're against Bitcoin, you're against democracy, right? So let's not waste the opportunity that everyone's obsessed with November and create that argument for us, right? Let's do it. Don't do it for democracy. Do it for Bitcoin.
That's awesome. Yeah, we got him. We finally got him. They have to pick.
Miss Warren, if you curtail energy to miners, you are diminishing the protection that they offer to democracy.
Very cool. Well, gosh, I don't have any other questions. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? No? Well, Carlinho, this is awesome, man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is really great. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, let's give him a round of applause. I guess I lied. I do have one more quick question. So how did you implement this? Like, who did you know? Like, how did you get involved with this to where you were able to implement this? It sounds pretty crazy, like from the outside looking in, to be able to implement this at the Guatemalan election.
It's a very long story. The short version is Satoshi has a plan and I am merely his instrument.
There you go. It sounds about like what it would take. It's like an actual person.
There were a lot of people involved that were in the right place at the right time. It's crazy. Like Bitcoin is a cheat code, right? Like once you start working on Bitcoin, the impossible becomes possible. I first got involved in 2011 as a volunteer at the voting tables. And so I was a CoinJoin coordinator. And then I came back in 2015. And then my dad ran for Congress in 2019. And so I came back as a political party witness to try to audit the election. And that's when the election, I think, was stolen. And so then, became kind of viral in 2019 and just had a bunch of friends that helped me out to do, crazy stuff. It's really, I used to organize the meetups in Guatemala City. And so basically my crew from the meetups were like, when the shit hit the fan, I was like calling all nerds, let's fucking go. And, people showed up and we actually built it. But it was, it's a community effort, right? That's why I also love talking with meetups because, it's a story of the value and the network that you create at the local level at the meetup can actually, someone knows someone at the election, someone knows someone in the political party, someone knows. And so with that kind of community brain, a lot of magical things happen if you're all aligned in terms of, we got to do this for Bitcoin, right? And so, yeah.
Incredible. Well, yeah, thanks again for joining us. So Simple Proof. Let's see, you dropped another link in the chat to actually, we could audit it ourselves.
Yeah.
What was it?
The link in the chat is how to run it yourselves if you want to, and then opentimestamps.org. I didn't mention that. That's actually useful. If you don't know what Open Timestamps is, check it out. I don't know a single money maximalist that is against Open Timestamps, and I know a lot of them, and I spoke to all of them and asked them, is there something wrong with Open Timestamps? And no one said no. And so I joke that Bitcoiners have consensus on 21 million, right? And Open Timestamps. And that's it. Like, it's actually pretty fucking powerful that no one is against this thing. And yet only like OGs that were at least around in 2016 actually know about this. All the noobs aren't aware about Open Timestamps. And I got the unlucky position of last year when the whole ordinal thing happened. It's like everyone thought I was fucking kryptonite, and no one wants to talk to me about what I did because they all assume that I'm doing ordinals and JPEGs on Bitcoin. And it's like, it's fucking not, right? It's Open Timestamps. And so Open Timestamps is not ordinals. It's not inscriptions. It's actually fucking awesome. And it could keep you from going to jail. So learn and use it.
Yeah, whenever you first talked to me about it, that was my initial impression too. I was like, hey, so JPEG, you take the JPEG and you put it on the blockchain, and I'm like
300,000 JPEGs.
Yeah, so it's really cool, man. Very awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again for joining us. I think we'll call it here.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And yeah, man, take it easy.
Cheers. Thanks for your time. Bye.